Good evening. My name is Agnes Peer. I'm going to be the moderator today for our legislative dialogue. The purpose of our gathering is to have a broad discussion of issues in order to establish and maintain good relationships with our legislators, to become familiar with legislators' own priorities, to acquaint legislators with the League's advocacy agenda, and to educate our members and the public in upcoming legislative issues. This is a free exchange of ideas, and all are invited to participate and learn. We will be getting some questions from the audience. We already have. Now, I'm going to give you some information about what our districts are and who represents us, and then I will introduce each of the participants that are here today. Information on the districts is that the town of Windsor is divided into 2 Senate districts and 4 House seats. State Representative Bob Gibson represents the 15th Connecticut House District. State Representative Scott Storms represents the 60th House District, which is portions of Windsor and all of Windsor Locks. State Representative Brendan McKee, who will not be joining us today, represents the 5th House District, which is portions of Windsor and Hartford. State Senator Douglas McCory represents the 2nd Connecticut Senate District, representing portions of Windsor, Bloomfield, and Hartford. And then State Senator John Kissel represents the 7th Connecticut Senate District, and that represents East Granby, Enfield, Summer, Suffield, Windsor Locks, and parts of Granby and Windsor. State Representative Tammy Swostowski, thank you, Swostowski, representing the 61st Connecticut House seat, represents Windsor, Suffield, and East Granby. Windsor is in the 1st U.S. Congressional District and is represented by U.S. Representative John Larson. And Connecticut is also represented by the U.S. Senate by Senator Chris Murphy and Senator Richard Blumenthal. So that's the way Windsor is divided up. We are actually divided up in a lot of things. Our program today is going to go in a more relaxed and freewheeling area, and people can respond to each other. We will ask the legislators to briefly, in about 5 minutes or so, to review their legislative priorities for this session and 3 or 4 specific issues they are supporting this session. We specifically would like the legislators to include their positions on fiscal crisis, the budget, national popular vote, privacy, the voter lists, early voting, among some issues. So to go over, these are the questions that we've prepared. Hopefully we will be able to get to all of them. First section will be on fiscal crisis and the budget. The next will be on the citizen election program, the State Elections Enforcement Commission, the National Popular Voter Pact, then early voting and no excuse absentee ballots, paid family leave and medical leave. And then we would also like to know your opinions on the tolls on state highways and recreational marijuana. So that would be the way we would like to go. We're going to begin. We were hoping that the 15th House District and the 2nd Senatorial District would be able to join us, but they are not here. Who are here is State Representative Scott Storms, State Representative Tammy Swostowski, and Senator John Kissel. So we are represented by both the House and the Senate, so we truly appreciate that. So without any further ado, why don't we start with Senator John Kissel?
Sure.
And you can give us what your legislative priorities are and 3 or 4 specific things that you feel are important.
Well, I want to just thank the Windsor and North Central League of Women Voters, you, Ms. Peer, and Ms. Carroll, who sent us the invitation, and my colleagues. You had indicated that The first issue has to do with our fiscal situation, and I think that's paramount. So one of the things that's top of mind for myself, and I know my colleagues in our caucus, the Senate Republican caucus, as well as folks in the House, is that how are we going to fix our budget, and are there any long-term proposals that we can enact to set us on a firm footing going forward. I think as folks realize, I'm not anti-union by any stretch of the imagination. Over the years that I've been lucky enough to represent Windsor and the other towns in north central Connecticut, I've been endorsed by a variety of unions over the years, most notably probably the corrections officers for decades. But I do think that we have an over-generous situation when it comes to state employees, including their retirement benefits and health benefits. And we've locked ourselves into a State Employee Bargaining Agent Coalition, or CBAC, agreement that is for the next 10 years. So we don't really have any wiggle room when it comes to that long-term responsibility, and maybe we need to all come back to the table and readjust that. And just by way of example, one item that I point towards is that not all state employees are able to take advantage of the benefit, but several, their highest years of service are the ones that are used to calculate their pensions. And so with some areas of state service, they tend to push that out in their pre-retirement years to maximize their pension. And I'm just not so sure that's fair to everyone else or the taxpayers. That being said, you had indicated what things are we necessarily in favor of, and while there's certainly a lot of issues that I'm very supportive of, a lot of what I perceive my job to be, and to go back to good old Calvin Coolidge as president, sometimes the best job a legislator can do is stop things, bad things, from occurring. So, for example, I'd like to see a sexual harassment law go through that's not overly burdensome to small businesses, and I know leadership is working on that. A pay equity bill that's not overly burdensome on businesses, but is workable, and I know that we're working on that. And in fact, I want to commend some House Republicans, and especially Vinnie Candelora, who's negotiated a bill that I think is going to be brought through the House and passed up to the Senate. But things like tolls, I adamantly oppose. And so anything I can do to try to stop that, I'm trying to stop that. So I'll stop right there so that I can address all the other questions more specifically and defer to my colleagues as we move on.
Thank you very much, Senator Kissel. Tammy?
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting us here this evening. I've looked forward to this the past couple of years, and it's been an interesting dialogue, and I really appreciate the opportunity. I'm on the Appropriations Committee, just like my two colleagues here. We have been spending a lot of time in the subcommittee process up until now. We finished the subcommittee process probably maybe about 2-3 weeks ago and made our recommendations to leadership. And we're still working on numbers. I'm hoping that we will be able to get a budget nailed down in the next couple of weeks. I mean, our session does end on May 9th. But we've been putting in, some serious time and effort into at least trying to get a good handle on numbers. One of the problems that Connecticut has with the budget is the amount of fixed expenses that we have. If you include debt service, if you include pensions and benefits, if you include contractual obligations, which would be salaries, and also Medicare, Medicaid obligations, we're talking about roughly 78% of our budget. So these are all fixed costs, so which means that we have to really, if we're going to do any trimming of the budget, we're down to just a small amount that we can look at this point. So I mean that's one of the challenges right now, because we do want to be careful to support people that really truly need to have the support, the social safety net. Other things that I'm working on, I'm ranking member on planning and development, which we handle municipal issues, planning and zoning, any statewide initiatives for economic development that include the municipalities. A lot of really interesting subject matter. Our committee's been working very hard on a bipartisan basis this year. We've had some good initiatives come through. I think one of the best ones that we've worked on will have removed some of the barriers for towns to share services, remove barriers for town governments to work more closely with boards of education, to be able to economize by sharing those services. And that's been that's been an important thing for me, because one of the towns I have is East Granby, which has 5,300 residents. So sharing services could be very meaningful. And I've got a couple of other pieces of legislation that I've worked on, one of which is a municipal option to increase the tax exemption for volunteer firefighters. We've had a situation where some of our towns have had problems recruiting volunteer firefighters, and this would increase the exemption from $1,000 to $1,500. That has passed through committee. It's in the Senate right now, and I think that's a very positive thing. I've got a few other things I've worked on as well, but I think I'd like to just move on so we can work on to other ones of my colleagues here, and we can follow up with additional questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I'm Scott Storms, representing the 60th District. Again, I want to thank the League of Women Voters for having me here today. This is the second time I've participated in this dialogue, this discussion, and I find it helpful from a standpoint of I absolutely like to hear from my colleagues and what they think, and we're happy to have Senator McCrory join us because it was starting to feel like a Republican caucus. So we're very pleased to have him here with us tonight. I serve on the Appropriations Committee and on the Judiciary Committee and Transportation Committee. So all of the things that you want to talk about tonight sort of have been crossing our desks, and John and Tammy serve on Appropriations as well as Transportation. John, you're not on the Transportation, are you?
No.
No, but, so we all serve on different committees, but in any event, we have some similar positions on that have been coming across. Appropriations, obviously, is the expense side of the budget. It is very disappointing, in my opinion, that we could not come to an agreement on a budget and in the budget issues before our committee ended its initial term. We had a lot of subcommittees that were working very hard, but we couldn't bring the consensus together. So we've given ourselves a couple of weeks to come back and hopefully have some bipartisan dialogue that will make some sense and we can move forward. But, you know, it is a matter of, on appropriations, is watching the expenditures and trying to find areas that may be less of a priority than another. Obviously, in transportation, we are talking tolls, and I know you want to get to that. We have 4 different toll proposals out there at this point, so it's a matter of which one might fit, if any. The Special Transportation Fund is the end-all and be-all of that toll issue and what we're going to do with the Special Transportation Fund and what we can do going into the future. And do we need tolls, even, is the question. So those are issues that we're examining. Judiciary, we've had many, many judicial appointments that we've been looking at. The Supreme Court justices have been coming before us. We recently took on the issue of some gun legislation. In an approach, we took on the cannabis issue. So they've been coming through different committees, sometimes unexpectedly, but they pop up and we've had these discussions. Essentially, we're moving most of these on so that there could be a general discussion in the General Assembly, and I think that will be a healthy conversation. My primary concern on the appropriation side is making sure that we have support services for our elderly and our IDD communities. So a lot of times those people don't have a voice at the table, and those areas, those communities get cut fairly regularly. Little slices at a time, but cut, and they're feeling it. Our community organizations, our community support organizations need our help. And then, of course, minimizing the impact of the budget crisis on our municipalities. They need to have a sustainable and predictable budget so that they can create their own budgets and that we can be fair to the taxpayers. So lots of things going on at the state capitol. I'm involved on a whole bunch of different levels. I'm enjoying it, but it's been very challenging at this point, so I think I'll move on to the senator.
Thank you very much, Representative Storms. Thank you very much for arriving. State Senator Douglas McCrory. We appreciate your coming. What we're doing right now is we'd like you to take about 4 or 5 minutes to tell what your major priorities are And if you could be specific, give us 3 or 4 that you are focusing on, we would muchly appreciate that. Thank you very much.
And thank you for having us. As you know, I'm Senator Doug McCrory, and I represent North Hartford, Windsor, and Bloomfield. And I'm extremely sorry for getting here late. I have had a heck of a day. And I'm going to tell you about my day. And you're going to
Going south, huh?
Oh, first it was a 9 o'clock meeting with an after-school program. I was working with a young lady who runs an after-school program. I had an opportunity to support the after-school program by allowing some young high school students to work with some elementary school students after school and get paid for it.
Oh, very good.
So that was at 9 o'clock. 10 o'clock was another meeting in my office, and that was another programming meeting. 11 o'clock, I was back at the Capitol, meeting with some people from educational committee and a group of advocates, educational advocates. That was 11 o'clock. Ran over to the convention center at 12 o'clock for the YWCA's annual gala, which was the first time I'd been to it. It was wonderful. I mean, it was a room full of about 500 women. And Gloria, what's his name? What's her name? Well-known out of New York from the 60s. I forget her last name. Steiner was the keynote speaker. And they were just recognizing their new CEO there, a young lady that used to be at the Urban, very good, Adrian Cochran. So I stayed there for about 45 minutes, left there, went to Bloomfield Senior Center. They had lunch. I served lunch to the seniors this afternoon. Then I left there, and my last stop was over at the, I just left, the Women's League of Hartford, the elementary, the pre-K program that's been there for 90 years. So I made a stop over there, and now I'm here. So I've had that type of day. So let's talk about what's going on at the Capitol. I think a lot of my colleagues has mentioned some of the legislation that we're working on. One of the tolls, let's talk about tolls real briefly. I support tolls in the state of Connecticut. I think it's very important that we institute them. I think there's ways that we can do it where we don't hurt the Connecticut residents. We can have a reduction in cost for them. They won't be the traditional toll booth that we had years ago. You can go by, it can be electronic. We know that legislation from DC says we can't put them at the border, at the borders, but there are places we can put them in there. I serve on the Finance Committee. I also serve on the Judicial Committee, and I also serve on Aging. I'm the chair of the Aging Committee. So tolls is an issue that I would like to see move forward in Connecticut. I'm not sure we're going to be able to do it this year, but it's something I do encourage. I heard there was talk about marijuana, quote, cannabis. I don't like to use the word marijuana, but yes, I would like to have a conversation about that. I think they could dig a little deeper about that. But I like it. I don't know if you saw me, but a couple of weeks ago I was on Face the State, and when we talking about that, I'm concerned about the hypocrisy that we're facing in Connecticut when we talk about marijuana. I find that a lot of communities have been damaged by and marginalized because a number of people from those communities have been incarcerated because of the selling marijuana when it was illegal. And now that we want to make it legalized and get in the business of the government, get in the business of selling marijuana recreationally, I find that we have to really talk about and look at what has been done in California and what has been done in Massachusetts to help those marginalized communities that have been affected and continue to be affected by so many people leaving that community, being incarcerated, and so many homes and families that have been broken up. So I'm interested in digging a little deeper when we talk about legalizing marijuana, but there's a stronger and longer conversation we need to have. We talked about judges. We just did a number of judges. We're going to be doing a few more. From my understanding, when I'm talking to my leadership in judiciary, they're going to come through the process on, I think it's on the 23rd. And it should be interesting. We have some people from this area that have been appointed by the governor, and I think that's something that we should look into and be very supportive on a bipartisan basis. Other things I'm interested in, our seniors. I want to really continue to help with our safety net. I like the fact that we're moving towards not taxing our pensions anymore. so we can keep more people in the state of Connecticut, and not have them leave us. So that's one, I think by not taxing pensions is a way that will encourage people to want to stay and remain in the state of Connecticut. So we don't want to stop doing that. I am an educator by trade. I've been in the business for 26 years. I've taught in elementary school and in middle school, and been an administrator in middle school and high school. So I think improving the quality of education that all our children receive in Connecticut is something that is very important to me. We had a conversation just the other day about MBR. We passed a bill in regards to minimum budget requirements. Some people liked it, some people didn't. And that if MBR requires that school districts spend the same amount of money they did last year on education, some school districts feel as though they don't need to do that because they lost a number of students. So that was a good, interesting conversation about that. It works both ways. A lot of school districts are losing children. A lot of school districts are not getting the same amount of ECS money that they got previously. So that's a conversation that we're continuing to have. Other than that, like I said, I really like working with our seniors. There's a number of things that we're working on the age committee, Meals on Wheels, reverse mortgages. A lot of people are looking to do things of that nature. But that's where we are, and I think that's about 4 minutes, and I'll love to answer any questions that you might have from this point. Thank you.
I thank you all very much for your initial statements on your priorities. What we'd like to do now is to follow up on some of the league's priorities, and we encourage an open dialogue between yourselves. If there is any questions in the audience, you can certainly write them down. We also have a mic that if you'd like to stand up and keep your question to a minute. The audience is also encouraged to ask any follow-up questions they might have. So with that, what we're going to do is I'm going to read to you what the league's major feelings are about the fiscal crisis and the budget, and then I'm going to ask you a question about it, and I'd like the four of you to address that, and if there are any questions from the audience to follow up on that, I would really appreciate it. And again, I encourage the four of you to have a dialogue amongst yourselves and the audience. Thank you. So, we're asking you, how do you believe that Connecticut arrived at this fiscal crisis, and what data do you have to back up your belief? How will you use this data to find solutions to our financial problems? Have you looked at any other states who face the same type of budgetary crisis that we've seen in Connecticut? And are there any ways that you've seen that we could also use from other states to help solve our problems? As the interest on the debt of the pension fund continues to increase, what are some of the possible solutions you are considering to address a potentially endless cycle? And I think all of you addressed that in your opening remarks, that is a major problem. What steps can the state legislature take in the short 2018 session to move away from blaming about past budgeting failures and move toward longer, more solutions in our major fiscal challenges today? I know there are a lot of different questions. Who would like to begin?
That was a
handful.
handful, right?
Right.
And I think we could probably
And
spend all night long on that topic.
You're right.
And I imagine you want them answered in order that you
order
asked.
that-
No, you don't need to do them in order at all. What we're really looking at is that we have a fiscal crisis. We know that. The pension is a problem within that. We're asking you, have you done any data collection to be able to look at it? What have you done to actually do some type of analysis to try to figure out ways to resolve that? That's kind of in that whole first thing. And then how do we move from this pointing fingers to going forward?
I'm not sure anybody's at this table is sitting here pointing fingers at each other. I mean, I think we have to recognize that this crisis has been brought on over a series of decades, and we didn't do what we were supposed to do way back when. So we're given a set of circumstances where we underfunded the budget, underfunded pensions, and now we have to pay the piper. Now, going forward is another issue, and that's where you may find some difference of opinion. I believe that we have to move away from the defined contribution type of a pension and move into a defined contribution type of pension, which is being employed in private industry all over the place, and allow the employees to take control of their investments for their retirements, just like I do as a private citizen. And I think you have, and I'm not trying to change the rules of the game in the seventh inning. You don't do that for those people that are in the system and fully vested with their pension. But for those that are just coming in, I think we can either encourage them through legislation that says, or negotiation that says, you must be in a defined contribution plan. And we can buy out those that haven't truly vested yet to a certain extent and fund their pensions or their deferred accounts up front. And that's going to save long-term money. And that's what I think we're really starting to look at, because we're putting money in now that is going to be available long-term. So we've got to stop the bleeding first and then look to see how we can restructure inside. That's a major problem. I mean, we're talking, Tammy said it, we're talking almost 78% of the budget being salaries, pensions, liabilities, and fixed costs. So we've got to do something about that, because we only have 23% of the budget to play with other than that. And that's a huge concern of mine. And I'm going to stop for a minute.
I would just say, first of all, the data is out there with the Office of Fiscal Analysis, and anytime we want to do any kind of research, we can turn to them. Second of all, not to sound overly partisan, but I've been lucky enough to serve the people of Windsor, the town that I grew up in, for the last 26 years in the state Senate. Once upon a time, the Senate for 2 years was Republican under a Republican governor, and we actually led the nation in welfare reform and other things. Now, was the Rowland administration or the Rell administration perfect? No. But would it be great for the people of the state of Connecticut to maybe put the House or the Senate in Republican hands for another couple of years and see if things change a little bit? I don't know, after 20 years of one-party control in the legislature, that might be a good experiment, but I wouldn't pick on Senator McCrory to make that happen. There's some other open seats where maybe that would take place. As far as working, though, in a bipartisan fashion or a nonpartisan fashion to address some of these fiscal issues, and people have talked about the relationship between state employees, the CBAC agreement, and how our hands are tied for the next 10 years, I would say we only have to look a few miles across the border to Rhode Island, where you have Governor Raimondo, a Democrat, who worked reforms with the Rhode Island state employees to try to have a melded system where it wasn't just the defined benefit and it was contributions, and that seems to be working in that little teeny state. So if Rhode Island can do it, why can't we do it? Also, let's look up north. I mean, you know, it's sad to me because on a personal basis, we have gotten along, maybe a couple votes in the legislature recently, we will not be getting along, but Governor Malloy and I, for the last 7 years, have had a decent relationship. But he is like the least regarded governor in the United States right now. And in Massachusetts, Charlie Baker is the most highest regarded governor. And that's just, you know, Massachusetts and Connecticut. So what are we doing so wrong, and what is Massachusetts doing so right? And so I would look to see what Massachusetts is doing as far as making sure that they have their fiscal house in order. And it's, you know, it's great to say, let's go to Boston because they have MIT and all the other universities. We've got great hubs here in Connecticut as well. So those are just some things. I mean, if something isn't working and you've been doing it for 20 years, maybe try something else for a couple of years and see if that's better, or at least has a better result. But I'm not saying that, you know, I would say it if the legislature was in the hands of Republicans for 20 years, I'd say give the Democrats a try. I just think that when both parties work together in truly bipartisan fashion, then we get the best results. And I just want to point out one last thing, and it's unrelated, but as one of the co-chairs of the Judiciary Committee, when Senator McCrory spoke about the marijuana issue, which I oppose legalizing marijuana, but when he said, if you're going to go down this path, you need to address those communities that were detrimentally impacted, I agree with him wholeheartedly. And I think that we owe that, and rather than diverting all those funds to other projects that might need our attention. So I just wanted to point that out and give them a high five on that issue. Thank you.
Probably
you
get
took-
3 high fives. in one second.
Senator
So-
Tory, would you like to?
So, yeah, first I'll say, I like what's going on in Massachusetts, but it wasn't too far long ago, about a couple of years ago, Massachusetts had a nickname, it was called Taxachusetts.
Yep.
Now, all of a sudden, it's progressive. So what changed? I'm not quite sure. There's a Democratic governor there.
Republican.
Republican.
Charlie
Charlie Baker's a
Republican
Republican.
government with the House controlled by the Democrats and the Senate controlled by Democrats. But all that say, this is not a Republican Democratic issue. The fact that we all live here in Connecticut and we all contribute to the problems of years ago, whether it was Jody Rell as the governor or we in the last 8 years as Governor Malloy. The issue was we were not fiscally responsive when we had resources. When we had actual resources, we spend. And now that we don't, the chicken's not coming home to roost. So what can we do about it? Yes, I do believe that new incoming state workers, we need to move to a defined contribution plan. But the issue with that is currently you have so many state employees who are at the highest level, tier 1 level. Nothing is going to change until they start to retire. So that's going to take a while. Right now, in order to us to find some savings, those new employees have to come in. We have to bring in new people because, things still have to work, but we have to have the ones that have been there for a while retire. So we're not going to see any changes in our pension benefits yet. Again, like you said, fixed costs. Almost 50% of the budget, over 50% of the budget is fixed costs. So how much wiggle room do we have to do for all the services that we all benefit from in Connecticut? We have a great educational system in the state of Connecticut that costs money. Other states aren't doing as well or don't spend as much as we do in Connecticut. So we're in a quagmire right now. Do I have all the answers? No. Bringing in more revenue via tolls, that's one solution. That's a short-term solution. It will benefit more in the long run. Where we legalize marijuana, if we don't get on it early, other states are going to get on it, so we're not going to be as successful. We are maxed ourselves out with gambling. I mean, we can't continue to build more casinos because it's the same number of people. All you're doing is recycling the same people that would have went to one casino to another casino. So building other casinos the solution financially? I don't think so. So we're really in a tough spot right now. We have to control our costs, but again, we still have, as we control our costs, we still have to have safety nets for those people who are not doing as well. For those seniors who are going to need the supports in place. We have an aging population. Many of our young people are leaving the state. So we have to take care of our people who have worked hard, like my parents, like yourselves, who have did everything they were supposed to do for 30, 35 years, and now we have to take care of them in their retirement years. That costs money. We got to find a way to close some of our state facilities where we're spending thousands upon thousands of dollars and serving so many smaller people. We have to find a way to work with our private industry much better. So that would be my take from it. Like I said, it's not a Democrat Republican thing. I don't think that's the way it is. Most people know me. I can work on any side of the aisle, any issue. My thing is we all drink the same water here. We all breathe the same air. We have to find ways to work together, regardless of what party you're in, what side of the aisle you are, your belief systems, and make sure that we have to do what we have to do to make sure our children have an opportunity, same opportunity or better opportunities that we had here in the state of Connecticut. Investing in UConn is very important, but if UConn can't do it, let's look at some of our private colleges and collaborate with our private colleges in the state of Connecticut to do some of the IT things that we're talking about doing some of the work that we want to do with electric boat, things of that nature. So that's my response.
The pensions are the big item, and absolutely we do need to move to a defined contribution system. But we can also look at them in a little different way. If you look at the teacher's pension, our liability right now is about between $1 and $2 billion per year on the teacher's pension. That balloons in I believe between 10 and 12 years. It becomes a much larger number. we can't really try to stretch it out too much. We can look at how we can possibly fund it maybe a little bit differently. We recently had the Commission on Fiscal Stability come in and gave us a bunch of recommendations, some of which were very good, some of which don't like at all, and I think uniformly there are people that don't like the whole package, but there are some interesting things that we need to look at. One of them would be using the lottery proceeds to apply to the teachers' pensions. I think that needs more study, but I think it's at least a start at a different way of looking at things. We also need to start looking at maybe a little bit more use of nonprofits, especially on social services for the elderly. A lot of these nonprofit organizations can do things less expensively and even better. Currently, some of the things that are handled by state employees is we have attrition. Maybe we start moving to some of the nonprofits, which we've had some really good experience with. The other thing is we have to stop borrowing as much. That's another big piece of our fixed expenses is debt service. And our borrowing has ballooned in the past 5 or 10 years. It's gotten just extremely out of hand. I think we just need to look a little closer at what we're funding, what we're actually deciding to slough off on children and grandchildren for expenses, because that's what's going to happen. Anything we bond today is being paid for down the road. I think we just need to be more careful. It'll reduce the debt service in the short term and ensure better prosperity for our state in the long term. So I really think that's one of the things we need to look at. We have less ability to control some of the short-term expenses because it's such a small part of the budget. But we can actually start, by reducing some of the amount of bonding, we can start looking at something that will help us down the road.
I mean, taking up where Tammy is on this one is, I think we also have to prioritize our bonding. These are important projects. These are the ones we have to accomplish. This is what we'd like to do. This is a need versus a needs list. And the senator brought up supporting EB just a few minutes ago. And while I do appreciate what Electric Boat does, and we do have some discussion on the table about retraining some of the workers for their new projects that are coming up. Recently, I saw that Senator Osteen proposed $100 million to be put into the EB as they build out. And I'm saying to myself, is that something the state should be doing, or is that a private concern, more of a private concern, when we need that kind of money elsewhere to protect our elderly and our social services more? Is that something we really need to spend it on, or is it, if we had it, would it be nice? So the kind of things, I think those are discussions that have to take place among the parties in a bipartisan fashion to set the priorities for this state.
And I actually support funding for job training well ahead of these giveaways for corporations. I think we can really do a much better job if we spend that money on training a workforce versus just giving it to corporations to move from one town to another or to lure them here. We have some really good companies here, and right now they're looking for a workforce. They have jobs that are empty, and it's a way to keep our young people here, and it's also a way to be able to keep our current businesses here.
I'd like to have one follow-up question. In last session, this is concerning pensions. In the last session, there was floated an idea of taking the teacher's pension and putting it back to the municipalities, that the municipalities would pick up the teacher pensions. What is your feeling and your thinking on that?
Well, I opposed it. I thought it was unfair. First of all, the municipalities traditionally had not had to take that burden. They didn't have any share in the negotiation of those benefits, and so then the governor and the administration was going to push that off onto towns. The natural consequence of that, in my opinion, would have been that the town council or the Board of Selectmen would look to the Board of Education and say, hey, folks, since this has to do with teachers' pensions, it's got to come out of the education side of the budget, which I don't think is fair, but that's how it probably would have gone down. And then all of a sudden, what's the net detrimental impact on our school children and educational programs and the like? So I thought that was completely unfair. And, if the towns had stake in the game, if the towns had an ability. We even researched whether the towns, if that happened, could the town step in and renegotiate those terms? I asked one of our crack researchers, Lisa Hammersley, who's just a whiz when it comes. She's right up there with Tammy. And they said, no, that what's been negotiated in the past, you're locked in. So even if we did that to the towns wouldn't even be able to go forward and change the terms. So how unfair is that? So nice, clever, but not a good idea, and totally unfair to municipalities. And the other thing is, like, I'll just use Enfield, for example, the largest town in my district. At the same time, the governor was threatening to cut like over $20 million of town aid to Little Enfield, 45,000 people. And other towns throughout the state got whacked as well. So so it was like two things. We're gonna take away your municipal aid, and at the same time, we're gonna give you more liability for these costs. Totally unfair to towns, because what's the town's ability? Raise taxes. That's all. I mean, you don't even have the mechanisms to do anything else other than raise property taxes. So I thought it was a really bad idea. That's just me.
A horrible, horrible idea. What I mentioned about the current liability being $1 to $2 billion, I could see that more and more of that being pushed onto the towns. That was a non-starter for me with the budget. Absolutely non-starter.
I think we had a universal agreement that it was a bad idea. No planning, the cost would have been on the communities that were not ready for it. But but you have to think about things this way. So look at a community like a New Britain, where you have about 6,000 or 7,000 teachers, 8,000 teachers, and they're paying their teachers a certain cost. Let's say they're paying $70,000 a year, and the state would take on the pension plan for them. Then you look at a community like a Greenwich, where they had much less number of teachers, making about $110,000 a year. The state is responsible for the pension on $110,000. The state was paying more for pensions in a wealthier community like a Greenwich with less teachers than it was paying for a lot more teachers in a poor community like New Britain. So that's the argument that the governor was making, that we're spending more money on pensions in wealthy communities for a small number of teachers, where we have marginalized communities where we have a large number of teachers who are not making that money, and it was out of whack. So I can understand why he said what the idea behind it, but just putting that on the communities with no preparation, no time in advance to prepare for it, and even doing the accounting on it, did not make sense. So there's a way, I understand, we have to actually way we do that, and it also causes problems for teachers. So wait, if you mean to tell me I can live in New Britain, make $60,000 a year, I can travel over to Avon and make $90,000 a year? That's unfair. So now the more experienced teachers will leave that community where they mostly need it and move to a community where they can make more money and have a larger pension. It just pits one community against another community, and it continues the opportunity gap that some people call achievement gap that perpetuates itself in the state of Connecticut. I'm done.
I'm just going to weigh in no, okay? No.
Succinct, very
I didn't
succinct.
like the timing of it either. I thought the timing of it was, there was no way that our towns could recover from that kind of cut at that point in time. So, no.
So we're going to move on from the budget and the fiscal crisis. We appreciate all of your thoughts. And we're going to go on to the citizen election program and the election enforcement program. And what we're asking you is, how will you work to support the CEP program and remove the restrictive timelines imposed on the SEEC, making it impossible for them to follow the complaint process through to just conclusions? So if you could just comment on where your priorities on for the Citizens Elections Program and the State Election Enforcement Commission.
Well, I apologize, like my good friend and colleague, Senator McCrory, but inversely, because I have to leave early. But I've actually been one of the few people that have consistently supported the Citizens Election Program. I actually to the consternation of several of my Republican colleagues in both chambers, was a champion in trying to get it up and running. Only because I just think that in many respects, especially in Washington, but back in the good old days here in Connecticut as well, just too much money in politics. Now, when they put the system in, I tried to tell them, hey, one size doesn't fit all, because you have these $100,000 campaigns down in Fairfield County. Campaigns up in north central Connecticut were like $20,000 campaigns, and yet now we have this system that one size fits all, and I don't think that's necessarily necessary, to be quite frank. If they said, in certain areas of the state, if you want to raise half the amount of money, we'll give you half the amount of contribution back to run your campaign, I'd say sure. And so I think that we should look at that, trying to fine-tune that system. I think we could probably save several $1 million. But I like the idea that you go out and you raise money from people in your district in small amounts and other amounts of money to reach a threshold, and then everybody has a fair playing field and has a set amount. A little crazy this year, though, with so many gubernatorial candidates. When you add up all these huge amounts of money they're getting, it's sort of incredible. But I think when you compare that to what happens in Washington, where as soon as a congressperson or a senator gets elected, they send them to a room once every couple of days to call for money, and they have to have huge amounts in their war chest. That's a crazy system and too much lobbyist influence. As far as the State Elections Enforcement Commission and their ability, I think they need to be prompt. I think in many respects, historically, they've been dilatory in trying to, a year is a pretty long time to get the information on some of these situations. I don't think it's too much to ask. At the same time, I think there should be some mechanism that, for good cause shown, might be a particularly nettlesome kind of issue, that they could get an extension. But I think for the candidate being investigated, to just have this hanging fire out there for over a year, I think that's a problem too. So there might be a happier balance going forward. And the other thing is, I don't think that we should ask them to do things by a certain set of time and at the same time pull away their resources, which is sort of what happened. So that's unfair. So if you're going to say tight timeline, give them the resources to do the job. Otherwise, get an escape hatch, which would be for good cause shown. You could go to maybe even a Superior Court judge and just say, hey, listen, we don't have the resources. We need another 6 months to wrap this up. And then some person who's objective can make that determination.
Go ahead.
No, I like that response, absolutely. Unless this is something, if you can identify there might be some ambiguity within a year and you want an extra 6 months, go to a judge and allow them to process it another 6 months. I think that's a great idea. As far as the program itself, so when I first got elected, there was no program like that. There was no election program where you can go get money from the state to run your election. And in a way, it was kind of good, but in a way it wasn't, because then for a person like myself who knew into politics, special interests will come and gravitate towards you and offer all kinds of support and help. And they're not doing this because they think they like you. They're doing it because they want access to you. And I don't want to be married to anyone. I like to make my decisions clear-minded without any one suggesting that I should do X, Y, or Z. So in a way, going to the state and since an election program where I can get financing for a program is much better than me having to depend on someone who comes to me on or off free money, and I know they're looking for a return. And quite frankly, I don't like asking people for money. I just don't like raising money. I think people work too hard in their communities, and the little money that they do have, they want to keep it for themselves. And for me to go ask them for $5, $10, $50, or $100, I just think it's unfair. I'm not built for that. I can't sit in a room and dial for dollars. I'm just not made of that. So
So it's not often I'd agree with the Senate, but I think I would wholeheartedly agree with. I'm sorry, John, I have to say that. But I'd agree with those senators on this situation. I think there's a lot of value in the CEP. I am concerned about the costs that we're running this year, and I wish there was some balance that we could strike with regard to all of these candidates. They seem to be able to raise instant money and instantly qualify, and that's going to cost the taxpayers of the state a ton of money for candidates that aren't probably, a lot of them aren't viable. I mean, it just, I don't know how to do it, so I'm saying I don't have a solution for it, but I wish there was a better balance there. As far as the SEC, they're a watchdog agency. I don't think we should be cutting them. We should be giving them the resources, but I do agree that a year is long enough, except for with good cause shown, or for good cause shown. So I like the answer.
And we have bipartisan and bicameral agreement here.
Very unusual.
Yes, so, no, I think it can be a little rich for our area particularly. I wouldn't mind if the amounts were cut back a little bit. And what I would love to see is some kind of restriction where the money would have to be spent in Connecticut.
Good. I have a follow-up question from the audience. It's an interesting question. It sort of hints back to pensions on legislators. The question is the following. The Connecticut legislative bodies are extremely large for the size and population of the state of Connecticut. Would you support a reduction in the numbers of senators and representatives?
Can I just speak to this for 1 second?
Sure.
Back in the 1960s, we had roughly 250 representatives. So we're actually a much smaller body than we were back then. I'm kind of a history buff. And I've heard this before as far as reducing the amount of size and making it a full-time legislature. The size, I mean, we might be able to do with less. I mean, like right now, I like being a representative. We have between 22 and 25,000 per district, and you get to know your constituents very well, and they feel very comfortable contacting you, things like that. It's a nice size. The minute it gets larger, start to get. That's one of the reasons I wouldn't run for Senate. John's safe from me.
John's really safe.
But as far as, and I know being a full-time legislature is something else that people have brought up frequently. And I like having a legislature where we have doctors, electricians, nurses, people who are actually working. We have too many lawyers.
That's true, that's true.
A lot less than we used to have.
But this gives us an opportunity to have, small business owners. It makes a big difference. Otherwise, we wind up with professional politicians. And and you're going to have people that are going to just stay in as long as they possibly can. I really think it would be a mistake in the long run we need representation in our state of people who are actually are out there doing things.
And I'll just say, my district is, and Senator McCrory's, it's 100,000 people. That's a lot of folks. 5 full communities and a huge, like 90% of Granby and probably, 10 or 15% of Windsor. But it's still a large geographical area to cover, and I strive my best to represent them. So, and plus we sort of toyed around with this idea over the years, and it's like, well, whose ox is going to get gored? I mean, who's going to make this decision from on high as to, all right, 36 senators is going to turn into 20 senators, because there's going to be winners and losers, and right. So who determines that? And I agree so much with Representative Zawistowski, with Tammy. If you get a full-time legislature, they're going to want to justify their existence. They're going to crank out bills all the time, and it's maybe not going to be best for the people of the state of Connecticut. Whereas with the part-time legislature, we have to balance everything. We've got one foot in the quote-unquote real world with real jobs and real in our communities, trying to make a living and feed our families. And on the other hand, we're in the legislature juggling a lot with a lot of time demands. But I think it ultimately produces better legislation, because for bills to get passed, quite often you have to have support across party lines. And also, for example, right now we're in the short session. The beginning of May, we should be done, and that means maybe some bad bills will fall by the wayside, and we'll be forced to focus on what can we actually do in the limited time that we have. And I think that's better for the people of the state of Connecticut. So thank you for inviting me this evening.
Yeah, I concur. I think that representing, if you're in the House, 22,000 to 25,000 is much better. And even in the Senate, is a lot more people that you have covering. You want to know your communities. You don't want to become a full-time, like you said, if you're a full-time legislator, that's what you do full-time. You want one person to have a leg in the real world. For example, as an educator, I don't want someone who's never been in the field of education making educational policy decisions. I would like someone who's been an educator or who's still in the field of education making educational decisions. And I do think we have too many lawyers there. and that's all you have.
Easy to pick on us
really-
now when the other lawyer left. I was at least had a team here for a while.
It's good to have a doctor on the health committee, healthcare committee. I think that's a great idea. They have the access. It's good to have a CPA on finance. I think that makes a whole lot of sense. So I like the way we have. I think the bigger question is, should we expand the time limits, instead of having election every 2 years, maybe having 4 years, or even having a question about having term limits. I think that's a question. That's a bigger question to have, I think, in Connecticut. Instead of having every 2 years, you're in front of people, ask for money, ask for them to vote for you, make it every 4 years, and let's talk about maybe having term limits, so you don't have career politicians in office.
Go ahead.
I like being a state representative. I like the size of my district. I get to know the people. I can walk down the street and know people. I can't imagine representing 100,000. And it allows the people to know who I am, and I feel closer to them, and I hope they feel closer to us so that they can call us and we can get them some constituent service. I understand the senators do a great job, but I also think the representatives are right there in the trenches, close to the people, and I think that's really important. I do like the idea of longer terms and term limits. 2 years, I have people that are out there campaigning now. I don't have time to campaign. I need to work on the legislative responsibilities. So it's an interesting situation that I find myself in now.
And remember, I was in the House for 12 years. Everywhere you go, people know you when you're in the House, and that's a good thing. People want to have that personal contact with you.
Let's turn to the National Popular Vote Compact. It is something that the League of Women Voters in Connecticut believe that is viable. What is your feelings on the National Popular Vote Compact? Their feeling is that this would assure the Connecticut citizens' votes will truly count in a presidential election.
So I'm going to jump in, probably opposed to the position, all right? Just so you know, I'm not in favor of the propositions that I've read to date. I would consider something like Maine, where we go a congressional district by congressional district, and I like that. There is a constitution. We're talking about a constitutional amendment that's needed in order to accomplish this. So I'm getting a little anxious about the conflict of laws between the state and the federal government. So if we're going to do it right, let's do it by process. Let's have the amendment process go forward. We'll have that discussion on a national basis rather than doing it piecemeal and having a patchwork quilt. And that's where I would come in.
You want to go?
Sure. I'm not a fan. I do like the idea of the bi-congressional district. I think that makes a lot of sense. And you know, if we ever, I just don't feel comfortable that you're changing people's votes, which is what in that compact. It would basically, if you vote one way, it just changes. And of course, then again, with their electoral system, it kind of does the same thing. But I just can't get comfortable with the idea that we're just agreeing that our state should go the way of the majority. I don't care which party it is, I'm not a fan.
So I guess I'm the only one that can say I support it wholeheartedly. When they said one man, one woman, one vote, I think that's what it should have been. I don't like the idea of electoral college. I don't like the history of electoral college. I don't like why we have electoral college and why that was presented. And I know the history of why it was presented. It was bad then. It was a bad idea then. It's a bad idea now. So I think every person's vote should count. Clearly, and when you look at presidential elections, Connecticut is not even on the radar. We do not have a voice in our federal government. They don't even come here. It's not even worth it. We haven't been in play for a number of years, and that's very unfortunate for the citizens in the state of Connecticut. So I support the national popular vote. I support it if you want to do it by congressional district. That's something I can compromise with. But I think every person's vote, every voice should be heard, and currently it's not done. It's unfortunately in this country that we focus on 5 or 6 states that determine who's going to lead this country. And it's been done for a long time, and it needs to stop.
I do have a follow-up comment, and I don't know, I can't remember where I read this in the past few days, but the greater Los Angeles area has a population that is actually larger than 29 of our states. So this would have a huge impact on our votes. I mean, the Connecticut's votes would actually count for less if we went to this compact. If it one person, one vote, yeah, but right now, we're actually getting a little more credit than one person, one vote in Connecticut, if you look at the Electoral College. If you look at our population versus what the impact is.
So
I think there's an ongoing discussion. I think there's some room for compromise between no and yes, and we might have found it, but we're only 3 people.
I mean, you know, look at the last election. The person with the most votes didn't win. And I don't think that was the idea behind when this country was founded. Everybody, even when it was founded, it was wrong because women didn't have the right to vote. And only landowners have the right to vote. So it was wrong then, and we're getting better. I guess eventually, at someday, we're going to fix it.
We're getting better.
If we stay on votes, privacy and voter lists are a very big thing. Right now, privacy is very much in everybody's mind. Connecticut's voter registration lists include each voter's full date of birth, information that facilitates identity theft. Will you support the Secretary of State's efforts to eliminate the full date of birth from the voter files and set limits to the uses of the voter files for authorized purposes? Right
Yes.
now, our voter lists are open.
Yes, I was amazed at what I can find in the
Yes.
convoters.com, okay? Now, I use it every single day because we send out note cards to the voters in the districts every single day. And through, my mother helps me. I'm going to give my mother the credit. We look at the people who pass away in our district, and we try to send out a card to the family. And the way I identify where these voters are is through the voter list. And I was amazed at the amount of information that's there. So I think it should be limited in some way. I don't know exactly what the proposal is, so I'm getting smart in my older age here, having been there a year and a half. I don't commit to something I haven't read fully, but I would look to somehow limit the amount of public access to that kind of information.
Yeah, I concur. I just don't know how we do it and not compromise the electoral process and not have any voter fraud. But I agree that I don't think that our full date of birth have to be there. There's just so much information that can be stolen. Look at what's going on with Facebook and all the other social media sites, and they don't even have half the information that we give on a registered voter's card.
I agree with the spirit of it. I just don't know what she has in mind as far as who would have access to it. I just wanted to make sure that the people who actually need the information get the access, but those who don't can't.
That was pretty easy, so,
I know,
do
that
you have
was
another
an easy one.
softball?
Yeah, everybody needed a softball.
Thank you.
Tammy, this is for you.
Oh, goody.
Again, it comes, and I'd like everyone else to comment on it as well. But
Sure.
you had mentioned barriers to towns sharing expenses. Can you explain what those are and what you meant by that?
Sure, I'll just give you a couple of examples. The Planning and Development Committee this year held a forum for regional cooperation, basically. We had a lot of the community organizations, the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities, the Council of Small Towns. We had our planning regions show up. We had some school superintendents show up. So we had a lot of people that we were getting input from. And what the purpose was to get an idea of what we can do to make life easier for towns. Just to kind of grab some of their ideas. And we had some ideas to begin with. We wanted to get some backup. And what we did, we went through the list. It was a fairly comprehensive list. I think it was about 10 or 15 pages full of ideas. And for this year, being a short session when we're supposed to really only deal with budgetary matters, this is budgetary as a matter of fact, but for the municipal level, we picked what we thought we could fairly easily pass this year. We put them in a bill. It's gone through our committee. It's sitting in it came in as the Senate bill, so it will We'll see how that goes with the Senate. And it'll come to the House afterward. But there's little controversial in it. It does things like makes consistent the terms of fire marshals. It does things like allows cities and towns to be able to share certain officers versus having to have their own. It has some model zoning pieces. It's got some information that would allow schools to cooperate better. If you had one school that offers certain courses, this would allow a little bit more ease in doing that if we could deal with the unions on that as well. We didn't do anything really on the union edge, but the union part of it, but at least if we have voluntary people that are willing to work together, it made it legal for them to do so. We'll work on some of the harder pieces next time. But it's very simple. We just want to be able to give towns a start, because there are things that, some towns can already do things. Some of my towns already share, like animal control officers. But there are some other areas that they're actually prohibited by statute from doing. So we just wanted to clean up some of that.
Senator McCory or Representative Storms, any comments on that regional?
I'm all in favor of allowing voluntary regionalization or regional resource sharing. I don't want it mandated from the state capital. I think we should encourage it in any way we can. If we can eliminate bars to allow the municipalities to share resources, I don't understand why a municipality wouldn't if it was economically beneficial to the municipality. I would encourage the municipal officers to reach out to surrounding towns and share resources. It could be a truck, it could be snow plowing services, it could be anything, but you've got unions to deal with, you've got a lot of things that come into play in different contracts. So we've got to eliminate the bars and encourage municipalities to reach out and share resources. Now, we have CROG and CREC and all of those that come together now to share resources, so maybe we need to give them some resources that they could better serve our communities. Don't know, there's a lot of different things, but I would be all in favor.
Matter of fact, what our bill did too is enable towns to get involved with some of the CREC services that they currently offer. It opens that door to be able to have, especially for purchasing power. So, yeah, there's a lot of other things. So.
Yeah, I agree too, that we should do it. But if you ask them to do it voluntarily, it's not going to happen, in my opinion, because we haven't happened. I think we can incentivize it from the state level, encourage them to do it, but it's going to be very difficult. Like you said, you have unions on the one side or the other. Think about it, guys. At the end of the day, we couldn't even get together as a school district to come up with a unified calendar so everybody could be on the same page, let alone sharing fire services and DPW services. I think it's something we should do. I think we should incentivize it. If we sit back and just allow it to happen on its own, I don't think it's going to happen. Think about it. I had this conversation not too long ago. It was two towns. It was actually here, New Britain and Berlin. They both had animal, kettles for the animals, the stray animals. They was like, well, let's combine services. How many stray animals are we going to have between? They wouldn't do it.
One of the reasons that we're actually doing this is because we're offering the towns the carrots right now because we know the sticks are coming. We know darn well that it's going to be, if they don't start doing it down in the future, I'm sure that there will start being penalties, especially on municipal funding.
Yeah.
We just want to set this in motion so towns can make their own choices.
I have another question from the audience that's a very interesting one. It was in the newspaper today. The State House saying that you should be focusing on budgets, but this one is the State House passed a liquor vending permission. It now goes to the Senate. How do you feel about liquor vending machines?
Well, I voted for it primarily because, number one.
Sometimes she and I vote different. I haven't checked out what the Z lady had done on that one.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, this is something that passed last year in the House as well. Number one, the observation is we shouldn't be wasting our time on a lot of other bills right now. We should be able to work on the budget. But we have to vote on what gets put before us. I'm not a huge fan, but what it does, it creates some opportunities for the small craft breweries and wineries to be able to do samples. You can get the card, they explained it very well. You can get a card, you get up to 10 ounces of wine and up to 32 ounces of beer, which you can buy 32 ounces of beer at a bar anyway when you buy a pitcher. But it's very controlled. But I like the fact that somebody can go into one of the craft breweries and get 2 ounces of beer to sample it and maybe go down and try the other ones. I have a winery in my district and a brewery under construction in my district. And I thought it would be actually a good thing to help out that kind of business.
I don't know anything about the bill, so I can't tell. But the title,
Is
it
intriguing.
sounds, it's like, so are you saying I can have a Coke machine and a Bud Light machine next to it? I mean, what does that mean?
Not it at all.
Well, that's in the title, it sounds like that's.
License permittee situation.
Okay.
So, I mean, what intrigued me about it is that the technology is available. All right. I went on a cruise a couple of years ago, and there was a robotic bartender. I went up there, hit the iPad, placed my whatever drink I was drinking that day, and I watched this little arm go over and pick out the bottle, pour it, right? And it came right up in front of me, right where I was supposed to be. The technology's there. The technology is happening all over the place, okay? And, I mean, look at the McDonald's. Where you go and you place it on the tablet and the food comes out, you pay for it, it's there. It is going to continue, all right? And it sounded bad to me at first, and then I sat there and listened to the debate and thought it through, and as I do a lot of times, I changed my mind in the middle of the debate, and I said, right, it's the technology, it's coming. You're still going to have oversight. You're still going to have a permittee on site that has to oversee what the operations is and make sure that his customers aren't inebriated as they leave the bar. It's all there. Everything is still there. The liability is still there. So it's nothing other than supplementing the bartender for a card and a robot. It's just a service. It's a service thing.
See, lost jobs.
It is a
I don't
lost
like
job,
it.
but the technology is going to do that all over the place, and that's why we need to retrain our employees and retool our manufacturers.
And you do still need people to fill these, you just need people to
Yeah, there's a
clean
whole
these.
different
There's a whole-
industry
yeah,
that's
it's a whole
gonna
different
grow up
thing.
over this.
Yeah.
As a former town clerk, this topic is extremely important to me. And we're talking about early voting and no excuse absentee voting. Will you support the Secretary of State's efforts to promote a constitutional amendment to remove restrictive language that prevents Connecticut from establishing options for early voting and no excuse absentee voting? As a former town clerk, one of the things that was very difficult was we would have caregivers bring in their client, their patient, their mother, their father, their brother, their sister to do absentee balloting. They could not leave their individual alone. So they'd say, can we do absentee, can we do an absentee ballot? We'd fill out, they'd hand them the application. There are exactly six things that you have to mark off as to, are you away from the town? Is it for a medical reason? So on. And they would say to us, which of these applies to me?
Right. So simple answer for me is yes, no excuse absentee. I would support that. The variations of early voting, I'm not sure of. I'm concerned about additional burdens on my municipalities for early voting and what that might cost my towns. And it seems like an unfunded liability to me. But a no excuse absentee, I would be supportive of.
So I support no excuse absentee also. I mean, it doesn't make sense. I mean, right now, people are choosing, and they might be choosing one that really doesn't pertain to them, but because there's only 6 boxes, they choose one.
Yep.
So, like, what? difference does it make if you just, you should have, if you put other on there, that'll be great. So I have no problem with that, and I encourage early voting. I think it's something we should do. It's our constitutional right. We should try to get as many people as we can to participate in elections. I support it. I think there should, as long as there's safeguards in place, that there's no funny stuff take place, but I really encourage early voting. I think early voting will encourage more people to vote. If you got, let's say you have 2 weeks, and within the first week, only the word get out, only 15% of the people actually participated in the election, that might spur others to, wait a minute, we can't have only 15%. The people decide who's going to be the governor or the mayor or the congressperson. It might encourage more people to want to get out and vote. And so often, so many times, it was a couple of elections that we know in the presidency that, people couldn't vote because the lines were so long on the one day they had, the 12 hours they had to vote. It's just unacceptable. We need to encourage people to get in voting, and I encourage actually early voting also.
On the no excuses absentee ballots, I concur with Senator McCrory, Doug, that they probably already have that. I think people are checking the box that most pertains to them. But I agree that I think we should, put the other box in, or at least have no excuse absentee ballots. I have some concerns about the early voting, primarily from a municipal standpoint, because we're talking about having extra staff on hand for our towns. And also, an awful lot of our towns use schools for polling places. So that could be a real complication. So I do have some concern. I would rather see a fully fleshed out proposal for that beforehand. I think it is going to be a burden on our towns. I think it's going to be an issue. If that can be resolved, maybe I could probably get behind it. But right now, that's a very big question.
Can I ask a question? Sure. On this topic? How might campaigning change if absentee ballots are being sent in a week early, and even barring the early voting piece, but absentee ballots can be sent in early. How could that change the campaign? Because a lot of advertising goes on at the very end. In the latest elections, we've had some, glaring exposés within a week of the election that turned the election.
Right.
So, in a state election, in a Senate election in Minnesota as well. But so how
do you get your vote back? That's the issue that I'm hearing you say. How do you get your vote back? From my standpoint, it wouldn't. Impact how I campaign. So but that's just my campaign. I understand that there are things that happen in a campaign that could impact. There must be some provision where you can draw back your vote. I just don't know how you do that.
There is.
There is a process where you can actually come in and request that your absentee ballot be returned. And there's a whole process that you go through, and then because they do not check off who's had an absentee ballot until right before the election. All right, so you can come in and pull your ballot out. There is an actual process.
Well, I like
to
the
do that.
absentee ballot because you could actually draw your absentee ballot back.
Yes, there's an actual process that you can actually walk into the
So
town
that
clerk's
almost
office
that
and
almost
say,
makes more sense.
I'm going to now vote at a poll.
Right.
Can I have my,
Right.
I'm now going to be in town, I want to vote
Right.
at a poll.
I know you can pull your absentee
But
ballot.
I'll concur. It's not going to change the way we campaign.
No.
Not at all.
Not any of the three of us, I don't think.
Senator McCrory, you brought up earlier on marijuana, the topic,
Cannabis.
cannabis.
There's a whole reason for that, but we're not going to go
You was
into
in
it. I was in
I
that
learned
tradition.
a lot
I
that
learned
day.
a whole bunch that day.
Connecticut has legal medical marijuana for a while, and it seems to be working, and it seems to, from everything that we read about, it seems to be a good thing for the medical profession, or for the patients in the medical profession. Can you give us your views of medical marijuana versus recreational?
What's the difference?
What are your views of medical marijuana now, which we have, it's legal, and now actually moving on to recreational?
Well, I kind of I kind of quickly went over it in my opening. So, I guess we all have agreed that there's a lot of benefits towards cannabis to use. Clearly, we have an opioid crisis in our country, in our state. We lost 1,000 people last year, 1,000 deaths. A lot of it because of the opioids. All the research shows that the use places where medical or recreational or medical marijuana states that use it, the number of opioid deaths have completely declined. I think it's a great deal of medical benefits towards it. Now, so as we transition off medical marijuana to recreational marijuana, that's a whole other conversation we have. Now we're talking about selling something to our citizens that one year it was illegal and you went to jail for it. The next year is legal and you can make money off it. I don't want to do this for financial reasons. That's the first thing. I don't think the money should go to our general budget. My conversation about hypocrisy is, if it was bad last year and it's good this year, that's a lot. That's hypocrisy to me. And last year and all those years before 1937, because in 36 it was okay, now on 37 it's bad, for some very racist reasons, why we went from 36 to 37, we marginalized a huge population of people. We placed them mass incarceration. We destroyed families. We destroyed communities, neighborhoods, all these things. And now all of a sudden we want to make it legal. So how do we heal those people, those communities, those neighborhoods, now that we're going to transition to something legal? Right now, what we have in place in Connecticut says if you have a felony, you can't get into the business of selling recreational marijuana. I think that's wrong. California did something different. They allow people, even people who have been incarcerated for selling marijuana, they helped them start their own business. Massachusetts did the same thing. Unless we do the same thing in Connecticut to support those communities who are still flat on their backs, who have been through it for years and years and years, we have incarcerated thousands of folks, destroyed thousands of communities and thousands of neighborhoods. If we don't use this opportunity, these resources that we could have by going legal and not heal those communities, I will not support it. It's just incomprehensible. I can't do it. It's wrong. It's absolutely wrong. It's not right. And you cannot tell me it's not right. And we can do it right because California has done it right. And also what California has did when they legalized it, every community doesn't have to sell it. You have to vote. The municipality will decide whether we could sell recreational marijuana in California. And guess what? Only 14 municipalities said you could sell recreational marijuana in California. So everyone thinks the whole state is selling marijuana. No, the community decides whether that's going to happen. And the odd thing about it is 2 communities that was brought up in the news. It was a Washington Post article about this about 3 weeks ago. So Oakland said yes, we're going to do it. We're going to allow people to sell recreational marijuana. Another community, I don't know, I'm kind of young, but there's another community that have a stereotype towards marijuana use. Is Compton, California. Compton, California said no, because they don't want to be stigmatized. They don't want the stigma of being a community that sells marijuana because they had that stigma attached to it. But so many people in that community have suffered. So I think if we're going to do it, we should decide which community want to do it and put parameters in place to encourage the resources to go back to those communities that have been marginalized for so many years. That's my point. I'm done.
Well, you could ask him another question on cannabis, and he could probably go for the next 4 minutes, and we're done, and we won't even have to answer it. I'm generally opposed to the legalization of what you refer to as recreational marijuana. I think one of the things that I thought was very interesting during one of our hearings was we had a 17-year-old from Guilford come up and ask us to stop using the phrase recreational marijuana. And she asked that because recreational implies that it's safe. And I thought this was very telling from a 17-year-old. So I'm concerned about that aspect of it. I'm concerned that we are jumping at something just for the sake of revenue, and that we haven't fully thought this thing out, and I would like to see the entire package, regulatory, addiction services, how we're going to heal our communities, what we're going to do to those people who are convicted of selling this type of drug in the past. What are we going to do? A whole package before we just do this piecemeal and we make mistakes. And we've got some track records to look at. You've now seen Oregon and California and Colorado, and we're going to watch Massachusetts for a couple of years. There's a study that one of the proposals is to have a study for implementation. I'm not saying I'm totally opposed to at least looking at it, but it has to be a package deal for me, and it's not just going to be based on, oh, we need the revenue, because I think there's a much greater cost than just the cost of implementing, the regulatory scheme. There's a cost to society, there's the addiction services, there's all kinds of things that are going to go on. The regulatory personnel alone are going to cost millions, hundreds of millions of dollars over the course of time here. So we've got to really look at it as a whole picture. Don't just reject it out of hand, but really look at it and see if it's something that we want to do in the state of Connecticut. There's pros and cons. I'm willing to listen to the debate.
Yeah, I have serious concerns. I have a sister who lives in Washington State, and they are having some issues. Driving is an issue. There's no actual test to tell if you're actually impaired or not. Nothing that's reliable at this point. I do think it sends the wrong message to younger people. Even if you have an age of 21, I think that still shows that it's okay. I mean, we've had so much peer pressure on cigarettes. All of a sudden, it's okay for marijuana. I mean, it just seems to be a little contradictory. Also, the way that Connecticut tends to tax things, I'm also concerned that the taxes are going to be so high that people are still going to wind up in the black market. They did some evaluations in Massachusetts on that, and I think they wound up either 20 or 30% tax, and there will still be a black market no matter what. And then one last thing, I mean, it's still on a Schedule A drug on the federal drug scale, whatever. Yeah, the conflict in laws, and the people that are interested in going into this business can't even get any type of standard bank funding, anything that's FDIC insured or anything else. It's against federal law. So there's a lot of complications we need to look at, but right now, I'm just not in favor of moving forward with this.
Thank you very much. One last question, very quick. Paid family and medical leave. How will Connecticut pay for this?
The current proposal shows the employee paying for this. That creates its own problems, but that's the way the current proposal is.
And there's a problem with that because the numbers don't work.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, what I'm looking at, what I'm seeing, the numbers of the employees paying a certain percentage in, and then what is anticipated that could be paid out. I don't see how we can do it with working those numbers, and how much is it going to cost? Again, it all comes down to a function of dollars and cents in the state budget. And while I don't think there's a person here that would disagree that it's an important conversation to have, all right, it's a question of how does it look? How is it going to be paid for? Who's going to pay for it? We keep throwing things on the employer. We have 7 to 10 employees down at the Labor Department that they don't know how to pay for, so they're going to put in a 0.05% charge against the employers based on salary.
Per employee.
Per employee. All right? Doesn't sound like much, 0.05%. Could be $7.50 or $10 per employee, but think about it. Every time you have a response, it's the employer's going to pay. Employer's going to pay. Those small business people are going to go out of business. That's what's going to happen. And I'm concerned about it. I'm concerned about it,
but I will try to work towards seeing we can make it happen as opposed to what we can do to not happen. If it can happen in the state of New York and other states, and they're doing fine, in other countries where they have a lot more time than we do for when someone needs the support, I think we have to, the devil's in the details, but I'm encouraged to try to find a way as opposed to, no, it can't happen. So.
I don't think anybody's saying, no, it can't happen here,
Yeah.
Senator. I
No,
think
I'm
we
just
need to
saying.
have the discussion, and it needs to be,
I
what
concur.
bothers me about some of the things that are happening at the state capitol, great idea, let's do it. And then when you start doing the math, it just doesn't work. And we come up with $200, $300 million deficits, and we don't know how we got there. It's because our
York.
math is wrong right from the start.
New York is doing it.
I'm not saying that they're not. I'm
Massachusetts is
saying
thinking about doing it.
Connecticut's math seems like
We're right
a
in
new
the
math,
middle.
Senator.
Why we can't do it?
The league supports CBIA's preference, which is to give employers tax credits for providing the paid
Let's
leave.
see how it works, yeah.
Yes, but it comes down to the
I think
numbers.
there's a
Oh,
way of
see,
doing
so
it.
we support the employer. If we give some corporate welfare away, then we see now people want to do it. By giving tax incentives, that's corporate welfare. So more people be inclined. So it depends on where you sit. So again, I don't know how we get there, but I'm willing to have a conversation. Put it that way.
Senator and I can have a conversation outside the chamber. How's that?
In conclusion, we thank you. Thank you to our legislators for participating in this discussion. Thank you to WGTV for taping the program, for broadcasting it and sharing it with Wind TV for the broadcast, so everybody will be able to see us ongoing. Thank you to the town of Windsor for the use of these facilities. Thank you to the viewers at home for tuning in. For information on the League of Women Voters, membership, and events, please visit our website, www.lwvct.org/Windsor. And thank you to our audience for coming
Clap, 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 clap.
and for providing questions.
The Howley Union.
Have a great evening.
All right.
Thank you.